What if you could disarm a narcissist not through confrontation, but with a single powerful question? Are narcissists truly invulnerable, or are they just waiting for the right question to expose their truth? Imagine revealing a narcissist's hidden insecurity not by shouting, but by calmly asking the right question. Welcome to StoicCraft, where ancient Stoic philosophy meets modern strategies for self-control and navigating difficult relationships. Today, discover how focusing on calm observation and strategic questioning can help you expose a narcissist's defenses without confrontation. You sit across from them, your heart pounding. You've rehearsed this moment 100 times in your head. You're going to call them out, expose their lies, finally get the truth. I know you've been lying, you say, keeping your voice steady. The narcissist blinks. Just for a second, but then they tilt their head and smirk. Lying me, wow, that's interesting. Why would you think that your stomach twists? You explain, you lay out the facts, the contradictions, the screenshots, the undeniable proof. They lean back, sighing, like a teacher disappointed in their student. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. I don't know what's more sad, that you actually believe this nonsense, or that you've wasted all this time trying to prove a point. The conversation spirals. Suddenly, they're the victim. You're the aggressor. They accuse you of being paranoid, dramatic, or obsessed. They say they feel sorry for you, maybe even throw in a wow. I never knew you could be this cruel. Then comes the final blow. You know what? I don't even care anymore. Think whatever you want. I'm done with this. Before you know it, you're the one apologizing, questioning whether you overreacted. Your head is spinning. How did this happen? Sound familiar? If you've ever tried to confront a narcissist, you know this exact pattern. They twist, manipulate, and distort reality until you start doubting your own mind. But what if there was a way to flip the script? A single question so powerful, so well crafted, that it forces a narcissist to expose themselves there. But before we get to that, you need to understand why confronting a narcissist usually backfires, and what you must do instead. You've probably noticed something. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. Every time you try to call a narcissist out, the conversation never goes the way you expect. It's like trying to grab a fistful of smoke. Just when you think you've cornered them, they slip away, leaving you even more confused than before. But why does this happen? Why is exposing a narcissist so incredibly difficult? The answer lies in how they protect their false self. A narcissist's identity is built on a fragile illusion, an image of superiority and control. They cannot afford to let this image crack, so when confronted, narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. Their mind goes into self-preservation mode triggering a set of defense mechanisms designed to deflect, distort, and deceive. They gaslight you, convincing you that things didn't happen the way you remember. You present proof, undeniable evidence, and they look you in the eye and say that never happened. You're imagining things, and suddenly you begin to doubt yourself. If that doesn't work, they flip the script. Instead of addressing the issue, they accuse you of being the problem. Somehow, within minutes, you're the one defending yourself. And if that still doesn't work, they talk in circles until the argument loses all meaning. What started as a clear discussion turns into a whirlwind of contradictions and misdirection, and when all else fails, they become the victim. Suddenly, they're the one hurt. They look at you with wounded eyes and whisper, "I can't believe you treat me this way." And just like that, you start second-guessing yourself. They're not just avoiding accountability, they're manipulating reality itself. And the worst part, they do it so convincingly that even you start to wonder if you're the problem. This is why traditional confrontation doesn't work. You can't reason with someone who doesn't operate in good faith. But what you can do is ask a question that forces them to trip over their own lies, one that no amount of gaslighting or blame shifting can fully escape. We're getting close, but before I reveal the question, let's talk about the biggest mistakes people make when confronting a narcissist and why they backfire. You know the feeling. You've tried everything. Reasoning. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. Confronting, even pleading for the truth. But every time the narcissist twists the situation, leaving you even more frustrated than before. You lay out the facts, thinking surely they can't deny this, but they do, and somehow they make you look like the unreasonable one. It's exhausting, it's unfair, and yet it keeps happening. But what if I told you there was a way to turn the tables? A way to make a narcissist reveal themselves, not through confrontation, not through logic, but through a single, well-placed question. Before I tell you what that question is, narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. Let's talk about why it works. Most people try to expose narcissists by accusing them directly. They say things like, "You're lying," or "Why do you always manipulate people?" But here's the problem. Narcissists never admit fault. They will gaslight, deflect, and spin the situation until you're the one on the defensive. That's why you need to approach them differently. Instead of attacking them head on, you need to ask a question that traps them in their own contradiction. One that forces them to respond in a way that exposes their true nature. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. It's not about forcing them to confess, because they never will. It's about making them reveal themselves in a way they can't control. Think of it like setting a trap. Instead of chasing them, you let them walk right into it. A question so simple, so precise that a narcissist won't know how to escape it. And when they answer, that's when the mask starts to slip. You won't need endless arguments or circular conversations. This question works because it exposes them without direct confrontation. It forces them into a position. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid, where they can't lie their way out. And once you understand how it works, you'll never see them the same way again. From that moment forward, you'll recognize manipulation before it even begins. So what is this one powerful question? That's exactly what we're about to uncover. You've probably tried confronting them before. You thought that if you just explained your side, clearly laid out the facts, or even shared how much their behavior hurt they'd finally understand. Maybe, just maybe, they'd even admit to what they did. But that never happens, does it? Instead, they twist your words, dodge accountability, and somehow by the end of it, you're the one apologizing. Why? Because there are certain mistakes people make when trying to confront a narcissist, mistakes that give them even more power. One of the biggest mistakes, expecting honesty. Narcissists don't play by the same rules. To them, the truth is whatever benefits them in the moment. If lying helps them maintain control, they will lie without hesitation. If distorting the facts shifts blame away from them, narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. They will rewrite history right in front of you. They don't care about what's real. They care about winning another common mistake, trying to appeal to their empathy. You might think that if you just show them how much their actions have hurt you, they'll finally feel remorse. But narcissists don't process emotions the way normal people do. Your pain doesn't make them feel guilty. It makes them feel powerful. Then there's the mistake of getting emotional yourself. The more frustrated, angry, or hurt you become, the more control they have over you. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. Narcissists thrive on emotional chaos because it allows them to flip the script. If they can push you into an emotional reaction, they can paint you as the irrational one. Another mistake, believing they will care about proof. You could have screenshots, recordings, or undeniable evidence. None of it will matter if they can't refute the evidence. They will dismiss it, twist it, or attack you for even bringing it up. And the biggest mistake of all, trying to force accountability. You might want closure. You might want them to acknowledge what they've done. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. But narcissists don't take accountability. Not in the way you hope. If they ever admit fault, it will be in a way that still makes them the victim. They'll say things like, "I guess I'm just the worst person ever, right?" Or, I'm sorry you feel that way. These aren't real apologies. They are tactics. Ways to avoid responsibility while making you feel guilty for even bringing it up. And here's where most people fall into the trap. The more you push for accountability, the more they double down. You might go in thinking, if I just explain one more time. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. Maybe they'll finally get it, but each time you engage, you give them another opportunity to manipulate the narrative. Before you know it, you're caught in an endless cycle trying to prove reality to someone who refuses to acknowledge it. So what's the solution if logic, proof, and emotion don't work? How do you expose them? This is where the one powerful question comes in, a question so effective that it forces them into a trap of their own making. You've probably noticed something frustrating. No matter how hard you try to confront a narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. Nothing ever seems to work. You come prepared with facts, logic, even undeniable proof, thinking this time they won't be able to get away with it, but they do. The more you push, the more they twist reality. The more you try to hold them accountable, the more they turn the tables. Somehow you become the villain and they walk away unscathed. Why? Because the tactics most people use against narcissists actually backfire. And here's why: one of the most common mistakes is trying to out-argue them. With logic, you assume that if you just explain things rationally. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. They'll be forced to acknowledge the truth. But narcissists don't argue to find solutions. They argue to dominate, confuse, and wear you down. If they can't win with facts, they'll shift the argument, change the subject, or start making personal attacks. You might walk into the conversation thinking you're talking about one issue, but within minutes the topic has changed completely, and you're defending yourself instead another way. These tactics backfire, trying to make them feel guilty. You might think that if they just understood how much they've hurt you. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. They'd finally feel remorse, but narcissists don't feel guilt the way normal people do. Instead of making them reflect on their actions, your vulnerability gives them ammunition. They see your emotions as a weakness. They can exploit. Ever notice how when you open up about your feelings, they either dismiss them or use them against you later? That's not an accident. It's a tactic. Another major mistake, thinking that exposing them will make others see the truth. You might believe that if you reveal their lies, people will finally see what You see, narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. But narcissists are experts at controlling how others perceive them. If they sense that they're being exposed, they'll go into damage control mode, playing the victim, spreading false narratives and making sure you look like the unstable one. They might say things like, "I don't know why they're acting like this. I've always been so supportive," or worse, they'll accuse you of being the abuser. And if you try to use evidence against them, they'll find a way to twist it. They won't argue with facts, they'll argue with emotions. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. You show them proof, and suddenly they're crying about how hurt they are that you'd go to such lengths to make them look bad. Before you know it, you're the one apologizing for defending yourself. So what's the takeaway? Traditional confrontation doesn't work. You can't out-logic someone who doesn't argue in good faith. You can't appeal to emotions when someone lacks empathy. And you can't force accountability when someone will never admit to wrongdoing. So what can you do? Instead of playing their game, you need a different approach. One that forces them into a position where they can't manipulate, twist, or escape the truth. That's exactly what we're about to uncover next. Narcissists thrive in chaos. They manipulate conversations, distort reality, and wear you down until you're too exhausted to keep fighting. That's why traditional confrontation never works. But what if you could sidestep their defenses entirely? What if instead of arguing or trying to force accountability, you asked a question so powerful that it forced them to reveal their true nature? Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. To understand why this works, we need to look at the psychology behind how narcissists think. For a narcissist, control is everything. They don't engage in conversations to exchange ideas or solve problems. They engage to win. Every conversation is a battle, and their goal is to control the narrative, control your emotions, and ultimately control you. If they feel that control slipping, they will do whatever it takes to regain it. Whether that means gaslighting, playing the victim, or turning others against you. This is why when you confront them directly, narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. They fight back. They don't care about truth or fairness. They only care about maintaining dominance. Narcissists are masters of deflection. If you call them out, they'll shift blame. If you prove them wrong, they'll change the subject. If you show them evidence, they'll dismiss it. But there's one thing narcissists struggle with: direct, open-ended questions that force them to expose themselves. Why? Because their instinct is always to manipulate, but when a question is structured correctly, it leaves and no escape route. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. Instead of reacting emotionally, instead of engaging in a back and forth, you ask a question that forces them into a dilemma, one where any answer they give will expose their true nature. Here's why this works. Narcissists cannot handle cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance happens when someone is faced with two conflicting ideas and their brain struggles to reconcile them. For narcissists, their self-image is everything they believe they are: superior, untouchable, and always in control. But when you ask the right question, narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. You force them into a situation where they can't maintain that illusion. If they answer honestly, they risk exposing themselves. If they lie, their story will contradict itself. Either way, the mask starts to slip. This is why asking the right question is so effective. It puts the narcissist in a position where they have no easy way out. If they hesitate, it becomes obvious. If they lash out, they prove your point. The more they try to escape, the more they reveal exactly what they don't want you to see. You might notice their expression change. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. Their voice might shift. They might suddenly act confused or irritated. This is the moment they realize they are caught. When you argue with a narcissist, you play their game they've mastered. But when you ask the right question, you flip the script. They're no longer the one controlling the conversation. You are. They will squirm, they will try to dodge, but the more they struggle, the more obvious their behavior becomes, and once you see them for who they truly are, you can finally break free from their control. So what is this one powerful question after everything? Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the endless cycles of confusion. You finally have something that works: a single question that stops a narcissist in their tracks. A question they cannot answer without exposing themselves. So what is it? What would you have done differently? At first glance it seems simple, but the brilliance of this question lies in what it forces the narcissist to do. When you ask a narcissist, what would you have done differently? You are putting them in a psychological trap. If they answer honestly, they have to acknowledge a mistake. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid, which is something narcissists are incapable of doing. Their entire sense of self is built on the illusion of never being wrong. But if they refuse to answer, hesitate, or try to twist the conversation, they expose their true nature. They might deflect. "Why are you always trying to blame me?" They might avoid answering. "I don't see why that matters," or they might shift the blame. "I wouldn't have done anything differently because you were the problem." No matter how they respond, they reveal themselves. This question works because it forces them to engage with a reality. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. They spend their entire lives avoiding personal accountability. Narcissists survive by rewriting history, twisting facts, and making sure they always come out on top. They cannot handle a direct question that forces them to reflect on their actions. And that's why, when you ask this question, you'll notice something shift. Maybe they stumble over their words. Maybe they lash out. Maybe they freeze for just a second too long. That's the moment they realize they're caught. You don't need to argue. You don't need to explain yourself. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. You don't need to prove anything, just ask the question, then watch what happens. Some narcissists will try to joke their way out of it, acting like they don't take the question seriously. Others will flat out refuse to answer, turning the conversation into an attack on you, and some may even walk away because they know any answer will expose them. And that's where your power comes in. You aren't asking this question to get them to change. You aren't asking because you expect a sincere answer. You're asking because it shows you the truth. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. And once you see them for who they truly are, you'll never unsee it. That moment is where everything shifts, because when you stop chasing their approval, when you stop expecting them to admit what they've done, when you stop playing their game, altogether you win. This question doesn't just expose a narcissist, it sets you free. And that's the real power. Now that you know the question, what would you have done differently? The next step is knowing how and when to use it, because timing, delivery, and emotional control make all the difference. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. If you ask the question the wrong way, when you're upset, when you're looking for validation, or when you expect a genuine answer, you might walk away, feeling just as frustrated as before. So here's how you use it effectively. Step 1. Stay emotionally neutral. The power of this question doesn't come from the words, it comes from how you ask it. If you ask with frustration, sarcasm, or desperation, the narcissist will pick up on it and use it against you. They will sense your emotions and twist them to regain control. Instead, you need to ask calmly. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. Steady voice, no emotion, no expectations. Think of it like dropping a trap and waiting for them to walk into it. The calmer you are, the more pressure they feel because they don't know what you're thinking, and that uncertainty, it terrifies them. Step 2, use it at the right moment. This question is most effective when the narcissist believes they are in control of the conversation. If you ask it when they're already defensive, they'll immediately shut down. But if you ask it when they feel like they've won the argument, it catches them completely off guard. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. Let them believe they've successfully dodged accountability. Let them feel like they've manipulated their way out of trouble. Then drop the question, what would you have done differently? Watch what happens next. Step 3, do not fill the silence. The moment after you ask this question is the most important part. Narcissists hate silence. If you ask the question and then immediately try to explain yourself, defend your reasoning, or soften the blow, you give them an escape route. Instead, you need to ask and then say nothing. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. Let the silence stretch. Let them sit with the discomfort. Let them be the one who breaks first, because that's when they reveal the truth. Step 4, observe. Don't engage once they respond. Your job isn't to argue with them, it's to watch how they react. Do they stumble over their words, get defensive? Change the subject, turn it back on you. Their reaction tells you everything you need to know, and that's the real goal of this question. Not to get them to admit fault, but to see them for who they really are, because once you recognize their tactics, you stop falling for them, and when they realize their usual tricks don't work on you anymore, that's when the power dynamic shifts. You stop explaining. You stop justifying. You stop playing their game. And that's when they start to lose control. You win by refusing to engage. That's how you use the question effectively. Now, let's talk about what happens next. You've seen the truth. You've learned how to expose a narcissist, not through confrontation, not through endless arguments, but with one simple question. What would you have done differently? Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. And now the real power lies in what you do next. Because the moment you recognize the pattern, the moment you stop reacting the way they expect, everything changes. Narcissists thrive on control, but control only works when you engage, when you stop explaining, stop defending, and stop seeking answers from someone who will never give them. You reclaim your power. This isn't about exposing them to others. It's about exposing them to yourself, so you can finally let go. You don't need their validation. You don't need their approval. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. And most importantly, you don't need their permission to walk away. The strongest move you can make is disengagement. No more proving your worth, no more trying to fix them, no more hoping for change that will never come. You are free, and that is the ultimate victory. So now you know how to expose a narcissist with just one powerful question. But here's what I didn't tell you. Even when you see through their manipulation, even when you stop engaging, there are moments when saying nothing at all is the most powerful move you can make. Narcissists rely on manipulation and confusion to maintain control in interactions. Rather than engage emotionally, maintain a calm, observant mindset. When you ask a clear, neutral question, you disrupt their psychological pattern, forcing them to confront realities they usually avoid. If you found this helpful, subscribe to StoicCraft for more timeless strategies on mastering yourself and navigating difficult personalities. Like and share this message with anyone struggling in toxic relationships. Remember, silence and strategy expose manipulation, never confrontation.